Welcome, dear viewers. This is Captain Shadow, and I'm thrilled to have you with us for today's live stream. Over the next 40 minutes, we'll explore dramatic and emotional stories that have shaped the history of aviation. From tragedies that brought about lasting changes to moments of pure human courage and resilience. Today's journey will leave you captivated and inspired. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be an unforgettable ride. If you're new here, welcome to our incredible community. Don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button and turn on notifications so you'll never miss an episode. Your support is invaluable, whether you're sharing this stream with friends, engaging with our posts, or simply tuning in. If you want to go a step further, check out our additional content, where we dive even deeper into the stories that define aviation. By being part of this community, you help us keep these stories alive. Thank you for being here. Today's stream focuses on some of the most powerful stories in aviation. Our main feature is the tragic tale of Air Canada Flight 621, a disaster that forever changed how safety is perceived in the skies. We'll also explore 4 incredible emergency landings over Canada that showcase the quick thinking and extraordinary skill of pilots and passengers alike. These stories remind us of the unpredictable nature of flight and the extraordinary people who face these challenges head-on. But this isn't just about aircraft or accidents. It's about the human side of aviation. The lives of passengers, the decisions of pilots, and the ripple effects that follow these events. Aviation isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's about the people, their stories, and the lessons they teach us. By the end of today's stream, I hope you'll see the skies in a whole new light. Together, we're building a community of aviation enthusiasts who celebrate the triumphs, honor the losses, and learn from the past. So, without further ado, let's take off and dive into today's stories. Ready? Let's begin. Our first stop is a flight from Pangbourne Memorial Airport in Washington State to Victoria, British Columbia. It's a route that typically promises smooth skies and routine operations. But as we'll soon discover, no flight is immune to unexpected challenges when human factors or technology falter. The aircraft we'll examine is the Bombardier CRJ-900LR, a modern regional jet capable of carrying between 76 and 90 passengers. Designed for efficiency and comfort, it's a workhorse of the regional aviation market. Yet even the most advanced machines can face critical situations. Let's rewind to the year 1970. On July 5th, Air Canada Flight 621, a scheduled flight from Montreal to Los Angeles with a stopover in Toronto, ended in tragedy. What should have been a routine journey turned into one of Canada's darkest days in aviation, claiming the lives of all 109 people aboard. This disaster led to critical changes in aviation safety standards. On July 5, 1970, Air Canada Flight 621, operated by a Douglas DC-8-263, was scheduled for a routine journey from Montreal to Los Angeles, with a planned stopover in Toronto. There were 109 people on board, 100 passengers, and 9 crew members. Among them were business travelers, families heading off on vacation, and individuals returning home. For most, it was an ordinary flight, like hundreds of others that took place daily. No one could have imagined that their journey would end in tragedy. Douglas DC-863 was one of the most advanced passenger aircraft of its time. Thanks to its 4 Pratt & Whitney engines, the plane could reach a cruising speed of nearly 900 kilometers per hour and cover distances exceeding 10,000 kilometers. This model was designed to offer passengers maximum comfort and provide the crew with top-tier safety. However, as later events would show, even the most advanced technology was not immune to human error. The crew consisted of highly experienced aviators. Captain Peter Hamilton had over 20,000 hours of flight experience. Supporting him was First Officer Donald Rowland, an equally skilled pilot with nearly 10,000 hours in the cockpit. Completing the team was Flight Engineer Douglas Barker, responsible for monitoring the aircraft's complex systems. Such an experienced team provided passengers with every reason to feel secure. On board were people of diverse nationalities. Most passengers were Canadian, but the flight also included travelers from the United States and other countries. Families with children occupied the front rows, while groups of businessmen discussed plans toward the back. The cabin crew ensured that all passengers felt comfortable throughout the flight. The atmosphere on board was peaceful, and the flight proceeded as planned. The plane departed Montreal at 8:44 a.m., perfectly on schedule. Weather conditions were favorable, with slight cloud cover and a gentle breeze. Passengers, absorbed in their activities, paid little attention to the passing kilometers. They expected a smooth landing in sunny Los Angeles within a few hours. As the aircraft neared Toronto, the crew began standard preparations for landing. Captain Hamilton informed passengers of the estimated arrival time at Pearson International Airport. The crew worked through the pre-landing checklist and entered necessary data into the autopilot. Everything appeared routine, but within minutes, a series of errors and miscommunications would set the stage for a tragedy. What went wrong? How did a routine flight become one of the most devastating accidents in Canadian aviation history? Let us step into the cockpit and follow the chain of events on that fateful day. Toronto. The crew of Air Canada Flight 621 was preparing for landing at Pearson International Airport. This routine procedure required full concentration and cooperation from the entire cockpit team. Captain Peter Hamilton guided the plane according to guidelines, while First Officer Donald Rowland read off the next points on the checklist. With their experience, no difficulties were anticipated. The weather in Toronto was moderately challenging. Visibility was reduced by a light fog, and the winds, though not strong, caused some turbulence. The crew decided to approach runway 32, which was suitable for this type of aircraft. The onboard systems were functioning correctly, and the plane was descending to the proper altitude, preparing for landing. As the DC-8 was in the final phase of descent, Captain Hamilton decided to activate the spoilers to slow down the aircraft before touchdown. Due to a misinterpretation of data, this device was activated too early. Although the spoilers had not yet fully impacted the flight speed, they disrupted the aerodynamics of the plane, altering its behavior in the air. The first landing attempt was unsuccessful. Captain Hamilton noticed that the aircraft was not in the correct position for a safe landing. He decided to abort the approach and execute a go-around procedure, which involves resuming flight and reapproaching the runway. This decision was in line with safety procedures. Passengers, despite the turbulence, remained calm. Most were unaware that there had been any problem. Flight attendants continued their work, and there was relative silence in the cabin. What was a momentary delay for the passengers was a critical moment for the cockpit crew, requiring maximum concentration. The crew entered new data into the autopilot, increased engine power, and began to ascend again. The decision to abort the landing was correct, but added additional stress. Flying in turbulence, limited visibility, and the tension associated with the earlier error began to affect the atmosphere in the cockpit. The crew knew that the second approach had to be executed perfectly. This was just the beginning of the problems. The decisions to be made in the next few minutes would prove crucial for the fate of the entire flight. The second landing approach began, according to procedures. Captain Hamilton, aiming to correct the errors from the first attempt, focused on precision. The cockpit was filled with a tense atmosphere. Every crew member concentrated on their tasks, and communication was quick and specific. Despite this, a slight tension between the pilots betrayed that the situation was getting out of control. The DC-8 began to descend to the appropriate altitude, approaching the runway. At about 360 meters above the ground, a tragic error occurred. Captain Hamilton, believing that the aircraft was ready to land, accidentally activated the thrust reversal mechanism, a system used to slow the aircraft after touching the runway. Instead of aiding the landing, this mechanism became the catalyst for disaster. A sudden change in aerodynamic forces caused a rapid decrease in speed. The engines, forced to operate in reverse, lost some of their power, leading to destabilization of the aircraft. Instead of continuing to descend smoothly, the plane began to lose altitude uncontrollably. The cockpit crew was in shock. Within seconds, they had to understand what was happening and find a solution. "Speed is dropping. Speed is dropping," shouted Flight Engineer Douglas Barker, pointing at the sudden changes on the indicators. Captain Hamilton immediately ordered an increase in engine power, but the thrust reversal mechanism prevented effective regaining of control. The pilots desperately tried to stabilize the aircraft, but each attempt was met with limitations due to the wrongly activated system. Instead of gently descending towards the runway, the aircraft began to plummet. Panic mounted in the cockpit, but the pilot still tried to save the situation. At this moment, passengers began to experience severe turbulence. Several people looked out the windows, seeing the ground approaching at an alarming speed. Some screamed, others clung to their seats, praying silently. Captain Hamilton tried to manually deactivate the thrust reversal mechanism, but it was too late. The aircraft was in a critical phase of flight, losing altitude at a rate that could no longer be stopped. At about 100 meters, the machine went into an uncontrollable spin. At this point, it became clear to most passengers that a safe landing was not possible. In the cabin, silence prevailed. At precisely 8:59 a.m., the Air Canada DC-8 263 struck the ground with an earth-shaking impact. The aircraft, unable to stabilize in its final descent, hit a field approximately 11 kilometers northeast of Toronto Pearson International Airport. Upon contact, the fully fueled jet erupted into a massive fireball. The explosion was so powerful that it shattered windows in nearby houses and sent debris flying hundreds of meters away. The force of the impact and subsequent fireball left no chance of survival. All 109 passengers and crew perished instantly, their journey ending in tragedy. Witnesses in the surrounding area described the scene as surreal and horrifying. The sky lit up like it was the middle of the day, one witness recounted. Another added, "We heard a sound like thunder, then saw a huge plume of black smoke rising into the sky." The shockwave from the explosion left many locals in stunned silence, frozen in disbelief as the blackened wreckage burned in the distance. Emergency services were alerted within minutes, with fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles rushing to the crash site. The scene that greeted them was one of total devastation. The intense heat from the flames made it nearly impossible for firefighters to approach the wreckage at first. Toxic fumes from burning jet fuel and debris added another layer of danger, forcing rescue teams to work cautiously. They fought tirelessly for hours, but their efforts were limited to controlling the fire and securing the area. When the flames were finally subdued, investigators began their grim task of examining the scene. The devastation was so extensive that identifying victims was nearly impossible without additional resources. Teams carefully combed through the wreckage, recovering personal belongings, black boxes, and fragments of the aircraft to piece together what had gone wrong. Every item collected felt heavy with the weight of loss and unanswered questions. News of the crash spread rapidly, capturing the attention of media outlets worldwide. Headlines ranged from tragedy in the skies to Air Canada disaster. What went wrong? Speculation began almost immediately. Some pointed to a mechanical failure, while others questioned pilot error. Grieving families, desperate for answers, anxiously awaited updates as the nation came together in mourning. In the days that followed, makeshift memorials began to appear near the crash site. Flowers, handwritten notes, and photographs created a somber tableau of grief and remembrance. One note, scrawled by a child, read, "Goodbye, Daddy, I'll always love you." Vigils were held across Canada, uniting communities in their shared loss and determination to prevent such tragedies in the future. The crash of Flight AC-621 was more than a mechanical or procedural failure. It was a deeply human tragedy that highlighted the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in aviation safety. Every decision, every oversight, and every moment leading up to the crash became a painful reminder of the need for continuous improvement in the industry. In the hours following the crash, the scene was chaotic, yet determined. Investigators from the Canadian Aviation Safety Board, CASB, arrived amidst the still smoldering wreckage, their expressions grim but focused. Their task was monumental: to uncover the truth behind this disaster and prevent future tragedies. Every fragment of the aircraft, every recorded word, and every piece of data was a puzzle piece in a haunting mystery. The black boxes, silent witnesses to the unfolding catastrophe, held the answers everyone sought. The cockpit voice recorder revealed the tense, desperate moments in the cockpit, while the flight data recorder exposed the technical details of the flight's final moments. Together, they told a heartbreaking story. The accidental activation of the thrust reversal mechanism at a dangerously low altitude disrupted the plane's aerodynamics, sealing its fate. The official report was a sobering document. It exposed the glaring oversight in aircraft design. There are no safeguards to prevent the activation of the thrust reversal mechanism mid-flight. Investigators also flagged the critical need for enhanced cockpit protocols during high-stress situations. Though the crew had shown remarkable professionalism, minor lapses in communication and timing had devastating consequences. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Families of the victims demanded justice, pushing for systemic changes to prevent such a calamity from ever happening again. The report did not just assign blame, it offered a path forward, recommending more rigorous pilot training, emergency scenario simulations, and a redesign of aircraft systems prone to misuse. These measures aimed to turn tragedy into meaningful progress. The crash of Air Canada 621 left an indelible mark on the aviation industry. One of the most significant changes was the redesign of thrust reversal systems to ensure they could never be activated during flight. This modification, now a global standard, marked a turning point in the way safety features were implemented and reviewed. Pilot training underwent a revolution. Airlines introduced intensive emergency scenario simulations, focusing not just on procedural responses, but on decision-making and communication under stress. Pilots were trained to think critically and adapt in real time, transforming checklists into tools for survival. This tragedy was a stark reminder of aviation's dual nature, a triumph of human ingenuity, but also a field fraught with unforgiving challenges. The lessons learned from Flight AC-621 were not in vain. Every flight today carries those lessons, ensuring that safety is never taken for granted. Though decades have passed, the memory of Flight AC-621 remains a poignant reminder of the cost of complacency and the relentless pursuit of progress. In every airport and on every aircraft, its legacy endures as a silent promise to the lives lost. The crash of Air Canada Flight 621 was a moment frozen in time, a catastrophic end to what began as an ordinary journey. It shattered lives, families, and communities, leaving behind a haunting silence and a burning question: how could this happen? The investigation revealed painful truths. A simple mistake, magnified by system design flaws, spiraled into an unstoppable tragedy. But it also exposed something more profound: our ability to learn, adapt, and change in the face of unspeakable loss. Every element of that day, from the thrust reversal mechanism to the cockpit conversations, became a lesson etched into the fabric of aviation history. This tragedy was not just an accident. It was a call to action, a stark reminder that no system, no human, is infallible. Decades later, the legacy of Flight 621 endures not in its wreckage, but in the lives saved by the changes it inspired. Safer skies, stronger protocols, and better training owe their existence to the sacrifice of those on board. Yet the story doesn't end here. It lives on in every takeoff, every landing, every moment of turbulence when passengers place their trust in machines and those who fly them. And it reminds us that vigilance is the price of progress. The story of the Air Canada 621 is a reminder of the importance of safety procedures and the continuous improvement of aviation technology. Each tragedy is a lesson that changes aviation for the better, protecting the lives of future passengers. If you appreciate these stories, please support our channel. Every reaction from you helps us reach new viewers. Together we can create more such stories. Now let's dive into 4 extraordinary stories that demonstrate how pilots and crews showed incredible composure in the face of extreme challenges. Each of these events is a testament to how proper training experience and courage can determine the fate of hundreds of passengers. The first of these stories involves Air Canada Flight 143, famously known as the Gimli glider. It's a remarkable example of skill and quick thinking that saved lives after the aircraft completely ran out of fuel. Another story takes us to Air Canada Flight 797, where a fire on board at cruising altitude demanded swift decisions and heroic efforts from the crew. You'll also hear about Air France Flight 358, which encountered a severe storm, and Swissair Flight 111, where a battle against an onboard fire pushed the limits of human and technical endurance. These stories remind us that behind every outcome, whether triumphant or tragic, stand individuals, their skills and their determination. Now, I'll tell you about a story that, although it had dramatic beginnings, ended in an almost miraculous way. On July 23, 1983, an incident occurred that went down in history as the Gimli glider, an aircraft that suddenly lost all its fuel mid-flight, and a crew that faced a challenge that no procedure could have predicted. Let's now move to the board of the Boeing 767, flying from Montreal to Edmonton. What happened that day? The flight in question was Air Canada 143, a routine passenger service from Montreal to Edmonton, with a planned stopover in Ottawa. The aircraft was a Boeing 767, a state-of-the-art plane for its time. Newly introduced into Air Canada's fleet, it was praised for its efficiency and advanced systems, but the events of that day would reveal a critical vulnerability: human error in the age of evolving technology. As the flight progressed, an unexpected alarm caught the attention of the pilots. Captain Robert Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal. A fuel pressure warning indicated a potential issue in one of the engines. The crew promptly shut down the affected engine, following standard procedure. Just minutes later, the second engine lost power. At 41,000 feet, the Boeing 767 was now a powerless glider. The loss of both engines meant the aircraft no longer had thrust, and crucially, it lost the ability to generate electrical power and hydraulic pressure. These systems were vital for controlling the plane, maintaining altitude, and navigating safely. Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal were now faced with an unimaginable challenge: landing a 132-ton commercial airliner with no engine power. The incident was later traced to a miscalculation during fueling. The aircraft's fuel quantity was entered incorrectly due to a misunderstanding of metric and imperial measurements. Canada had recently transitioned to the metric system, and the amount of fuel required was calculated in pounds rather than kilograms. As a result, the plane carried only half the fuel needed for the journey. This error had gone unnoticed during pre-flight checks, as the crew relied on systems that did not account for such a discrepancy. As the plane continued to glide, it became clear that the fuel had been exhausted far earlier than anticipated. Despite the dire situation, Captain Pearson's experience as a glider pilot proved invaluable. Recognizing the aircraft's glide potential, he calculated the best approach to extend their descent. Meanwhile, First Officer Quintal remembered an abandoned airfield in Gimli, Manitoba, which he had used during his time in the Royal Canadian Air Force. The decision was made to attempt an emergency landing there, even though the airfield was no longer an active airport. Unknown to the crew, the airstrip had been converted into a drag racing track and recreational area. On the day of the incident, it was hosting a crowd of spectators and racers. As the Boeing 767 approached Gimli, the challenges intensified. Without engines, the pilots could not deploy the landing gear fully, and the plane descended at an unusual angle. Using a maneuver known as a forward slip, Captain Pearson was able to reduce altitude rapidly while maintaining control. The plane touched down on the makeshift runway, skidding to a halt as its nose gear collapsed. Amazingly, there were no fatalities among the 61 passengers and crew on board. Spectators and racers on the ground managed to move out of harm's way, avoiding a secondary disaster. The successful landing was hailed as a remarkable display of skill and composure under pressure. It earned Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal recognition as heroes, though the incident also raised serious questions about airline procedures and fuel management practices. Subsequent investigations led to changes in training and systems to prevent similar errors in the future. Air Canada also implemented stricter protocols for verifying fuel quantities measurements, ensuring no room for miscalculation. The Gimli glider remains one of the most extraordinary stories in aviation history, a testament to the ingenuity and courage of pilots faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. Now that we've relived the incredible story of the Gimli glider, let's move on to a very different, yet equally compelling tale. This time, we focus on Air Canada Flight 797, a flight that began like any other, but soon turned into a desperate battle against time and an invisible, deadly enemy: fire. While this story doesn't have the same miraculous ending, it serves as a stark reminder of how fragile safety can be in the skies, and how quick thinking can still save lives in the most perilous of situations. It was June 2nd, 1983, and Air Canada Flight 797, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9, was scheduled to travel from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport to Toronto Pearson International Airport, with a stopover in Montreal. On board were 41 passengers and a crew of 5, including Captain Donald Cameron and First Officer Claude Ouimet, both experienced aviators. The flight began uneventfully, with the DC-9 cruising smoothly at 33,000 feet. About 90 minutes into the journey, an odor of smoke was detected in the cabin. Initially faint, it quickly intensified, alerting the flight attendants to a potentially serious issue. As the crew investigated, It became clear that the smoke was emanating from the rear lavatory. Flames were not immediately visible, but the growing intensity of the smoke indicated a fire raging out of control, hidden somewhere within the structure of the aircraft. Attempts to extinguish the fire with onboard fire extinguishers were unsuccessful. As the blaze was located deep within the walls and systems of the plane, smoke began to fill the cabin, spreading rapidly and causing panic among the passengers. Oxygen masks were deployed, but the situation worsened with every passing second. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Captain Cameron and First Officer Wimett made the immediate decision to divert the flight to Cincinnati, the nearest viable landing site. The aircraft descended rapidly as the cockpit crew coordinated with air traffic control, declaring an emergency. The passengers were instructed to prepare for an emergency landing. Flight attendants did their best to calm the increasingly frightened passengers, though the thick smoke made communication and movement difficult. Visibility in the cabin was severely reduced, and some passengers struggled to breathe despite the oxygen masks. At 4:20 p.m., just 17 minutes after the emergency was declared, Flight 797 touched down in Cincinnati. The pilots executed an expertly controlled landing despite the deteriorating conditions on board. Upon stopping, the flight crew immediately began the evacuation process. Emergency slides were deployed, and passengers began to disembark as fire crews rushed to the scene. As the evacuation progressed, the fire, now fueled by the fresh oxygen introduced when the doors opened, erupted into a full-scale blaze. The flames consumed the cabin rapidly, producing toxic fumes that claimed the lives of 23 passengers who were unable to escape in time. The remaining 23 passengers and all 5 crew members managed to evacuate successfully, many suffering from burns and smoke inhalation. The subsequent investigation, led by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, revealed that the fire had been caused by an electrical fault in the rear lavatory. A series of insulation materials and structural components had inadvertently acted as fuel for the flames, allowing the fire to spread rapidly through the aircraft. The investigation also highlighted several critical shortcomings in aviation safety at the time. Chief among them was the lack of smoke detectors in the lavatories and an insufficiently robust fire suppression system. Additionally, the materials used in the cabin were found to be highly flammable, contributing to the rapid spread of toxic smoke. The tragedy of Flight 797 prompted immediate action from aviation authorities worldwide. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and other regulatory bodies introduced new safety measures, including mandatory installation of smoke detectors in aircraft lavatories, improved fire-resistant materials for cabin interiors, enhanced fire suppression systems on board commercial aircraft, stricter evacuation procedures and training for flight crews. The incident also underscored the importance of rapid evacuation procedures, as well as the need for passengers to remain calm and follow crew instructions during emergencies. The story of Air Canada Flight 797 is one of both tragedy and heroism. While the loss of 23 lives is a devastating reminder of the dangers of fire in flight, the actions of the crew and the lessons learned from the incident have undoubtedly saved countless lives in the years since. Today, the legacy of Flight 797 lives on in the improved safety standards that were directly influenced by this tragic event. It stands as a somber yet crucial chapter in the history of aviation, reminding us that even the most routine flights require constant vigilance and preparation for the unexpected. Before we move on, if you enjoy what we do and want to see our channel grow, we kindly ask for your support. Your help allows us to create more engaging content and share fascinating stories. Thank you for being with us. Now, let's dive into a story packed with action, drama, and incredible bravery. This time, it's Air France Flight 358TA, Tale of Chaos, quick decision-making, and survival against the odds. On August 2nd, 2005, Air France Flight 358, an Airbus A342-300, was scheduled to travel from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris to Toronto Pearson International Airport, with 297 passengers and 12 crew members on board. It was a routine transatlantic flight until the final moments of its descent. As the aircraft neared Toronto, the weather turned treacherous. A severe thunderstorm engulfed the airport, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and reduced visibility. The pilots, Captain Alan Rose and First Officer Frederick Nord, were experienced aviators, but even their expertise was tested by the deteriorating conditions. Despite the weather, the crew decided to proceed with the landing, relying on the advanced capabilities of the Airbus A340 and their training. The runway assigned for landing runway 24L was shorter than ideal for a heavy aircraft in wet conditions, but it was deemed sufficient under normal circumstances. As the aircraft descended, passengers reported hearing the relentless pounding of rain against the windows and seeing flashes of lightning illuminate the darkened cabin. Many held their breath, sensing that something was not right. Touchdown occurred at 4:01 p.m., but almost immediately, the pilots realized they were in trouble. The aircraft landed too far down the rain-slicked runway, reducing the available distance for braking. Compounding the problem, the heavy rain created a layer of standing water, significantly diminishing the effectiveness of the brakes and reverse thrust. The Airbus hurtled down the runway, the pilots fighting to regain control. Captain Rose deployed maximum reverse thrust and applied full brakes, but the aircraft continued to skid. With the end of the runway rapidly approaching, it became clear they would not be able to stop in time. At the end of runway 24L was a steep ravine with a creek below. The aircraft overshot the runway, plunged into the ravine, and came to rest 300 meters past the runway threshold. Miraculously, the impact did not break the fuselage, but the left engine caught fire, and smoke began filling the cabin. Despite the chaos, the crew acted with remarkable composure. Captain Rose ordered an immediate evacuation, and the cabin crew sprang into action, guiding passengers to the emergency exits. The fire rapidly intensified, but the crew maintained order, helping passengers slide down the emergency chutes. Inside the cabin, fear and confusion were palpable. Passengers scrambled to escape, many assisting others despite their own terror. Some were injured during the evacuation, but the crew's training and the passengers' determination ensured that everyone escaped before the flames consumed the aircraft.
Bank angle, bank angle.
Within minutes, all 309 people on board were safely outside, standing in the pouring rain as fire crews arrived to extinguish the blaze. Against all odds, there were no fatalities. The quick actions of the pilots and cabin crew, combined with the effective evacuation procedures, ensured that every life was saved. The Airbus A340 was a total loss, consumed by the fire, but the people on board survived to tell the tale. This dramatic escape highlighted the importance of well-practiced evacuation protocols and the bravery of both crew and passengers in the face of catastrophe. Air France Flight 358 reminds us of the unpredictable nature of flying and the immense challenges faced by pilots and crews. This story could have ended very differently, but thanks to the skill and courage of everyone on board, it became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. After the harrowing escape of Air France Flight 358, we now turn to a story that reminds us of the thin line between hope and tragedy in the skies. This time, we recount the haunting tale of Swissair Flight 111, a flight that began routinely but ended in unimaginable heartbreak. While it's a story of immense courage and determination, it is also a sobering reminder of the unforgiving nature of emergencies at 30,000 feet. On September 2nd, 1998, Swissair Flight 111, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11, departed John F. Kennedy International Airport, bound for Switzerland. On board were 215 passengers and 14 crew members, including Captain Urs Zimmerman and First Officer Stefan L.W., both experienced pilots with thousands of flight hours. The MD-11 was a reliable workhorse, and this flight was expected to be uneventful. Roughly 53 minutes into the flight, cruising at 33,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, the crew detected an unusual odor in the cockpit. Initially faint, the smell grew stronger, prompting the pilots to suspect an electrical issue. Following standard protocol, they began troubleshooting while communicating with air traffic control in Moncton, New Brunswick. Then, the situation escalated. Smoke began to seep into the cockpit, and the pilots declared a pan-pan emergency signal less severe than Mayday, but indicating serious trouble. They requested a diversion to Halifax Stanfield International Airport, approximately 120 kilometers away. As the aircraft turned toward Halifax, the smoke thickened, obscuring instruments and filling the cockpit with a toxic haze. The pilots donned their oxygen masks, but conditions rapidly deteriorated. Flames were now visible near the overhead panel, and critical systems began to fail. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was tense but eerily calm. Passengers had no clear view of the fire, though some reported smelling smoke. Flight attendants worked to reassure them while bracing for an emergency landing. Back in the cockpit, Captain and First Officer struggled to maintain control. As systems shut down one by one, they faced a catastrophic cascade of failures. Communication with air traffic control became sporadic, and a flight data recorder later revealed that key navigational aids and displays had become unusable. Despite the chaos, the pilots remained focused, preparing for a landing in Halifax. However, just 13 minutes after the first signs of smoke, the situation spiraled beyond recovery. As the aircraft approached the coastline, the fire intensified, destroying critical electrical wiring and causing a total loss of control. At 10:31 p.m., Swissair Flight 111 disappeared from radar. Moments later, it crashed into the waters of St. Margaret's Bay, just off the coast of Nova Scotia. The impact was catastrophic. Traveling at approximately 345 knots, the MD-11 disintegrated on contact with the ocean. All 229 souls on board perished instantly. The crash of Swissair Flight 111 devastated families and communities worldwide. Rescue teams arrived quickly, but found no survivors. The wreckage was spread across the seabed, making recovery efforts challenging and painstaking. The investigation, led by the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, revealed that the fire originated in faulty wiring within the in-flight entertainment system. Flammable materials in the insulation contributed to the rapid spread of the fire, overwhelming the crew's ability to manage the situation.
Minimums 50, 40.
Thank you for joining us today to explore these emotional stories from the skies. Your support allows us to create more content like this. See you somewhere in the skies.